I watched my mother slip my grandmother's diamond necklace into my cousin's jewelry box, thinking I couldn't see her. For months, I'd been searching for pieces that kept mysteriously vanishing from my room, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened when the lawyer read my grandmother's will 6 months later. The truth about who really owned that jewelry would destroy our family forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first time I noticed something was missing, I convinced myself I'd simply misplaced it. My grandmother's pearl bracelet, the one with the tiny sapphire clasp that caught the light just right, had always sat in the small velvet compartment of my jewelry box. When I reached for it before my college graduation ceremony, the compartment was empty. "Mom, have you seen Grandma Rose's pearl bracelet?" I called down the hallway of our 2-story colonial in Westfield, Massachusetts. "Which bracelet, honey?" came her voice from the kitchen, but there was something off about her tone, a tightness that hadn't been there before. "The one with the sapphire clasp. I wanted to wear it today." A long pause. "Oh, that old thing? I think I saw it somewhere. Maybe check your dresser drawers." I spent 20 minutes searching every drawer, every corner of my room, even looking under the bed. Nothing. But graduation was in 2 hours, and I didn't have time to tear the house apart. That was 3 months ago. By the time my cousin Melissa arrived for her 2-week summer visit, I'd noticed 3 more pieces missing. My grandmother's silver locket with my grandfather's photo inside, a delicate gold chain with a small emerald pendant, and strangest of all, a vintage brooch shaped like a butterfly that my grandmother had specifically told me belonged to her own mother. "I'm so excited you're here," my mother gushed as Melissa dragged her oversized suitcase through our front drawer. "I've prepared the guest room with fresh flowers, and I stocked the bathroom with all those expensive skincare products you mentioned." Melissa had always been my mother's favorite niece. At 22, just a year older than me, she had the kind of effortless beauty that made heads turn, long auburn hair, green eyes, and a smile that could charm anyone. More importantly, she'd graduated from Princeton with a business degree and already had a job lined up at a prestigious marketing firm in Manhattan, unlike me, apparently. "Sarah, you look wonderful," Melissa said, giving me a brief hug that felt more obligatory than warm. "Still working at that little boutique downtown?" "It's actually a great job," I replied, trying not to let the condescension in her voice bother me. "I'm learning about fashion merchandising and that's nice." She cut me off, already turning back to my mother. "Aunt Patricia, I brought you something from New York." She pulled out an expensive-looking handbag. "I thought you'd love the color." My mother's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Oh, Melissa, you shouldn't have. This must have cost a fortune." "Only the best for my favorite aunt." I watched this exchange with growing irritation. When was the last time my mother had reacted that enthusiastically to anything I'd given her? When was the last time she'd called me her favorite anything? That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, the conversation revolved entirely around Melissa's achievements, her apartment in Soho, her upcoming promotion, her sophisticated boyfriend who worked on Wall Street. My mother hung on every word as if Melissa was sharing state secrets. "And the jewelry collection I've been building," Melissa continued, cutting into her salmon. "I've found some absolutely stunning vintage pieces at estate sales in the city. There's something so elegant about jewelry with history, don't you think?" My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "What kind of vintage pieces?" "Oh, you know, Art Deco brooches, Victorian lockets, some beautiful pearl work from the 1940s. I have this gorgeous bracelet with the most exquisite sapphire clasp." My blood went cold. "Sapphire clasp?" "Yes, it's quite unique. Small, but perfectly cut. The pearls have this lustrous quality that you just can't find in modern pieces." I looked at my mother, whose face had gone pale. She was staring at her plate, not meeting anyone's eyes. Where exactly did you find that bracelet? I asked, my voice barely steady. Melissa waved her hand dismissively. Some estate sale in Connecticut. The elderly woman selling it said it had been in her family for decades. Sad, really, having to part with family heirlooms, but I suppose everyone has their price. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I excused myself early, claiming a headache, and went to my room. But sleep was impossible. Instead, I sat at my window, staring out at the garden where my grandmother Rose used to teach me about different flowers, where she'd told me stories about each piece of jewelry she owned and promised they'd all be mine someday. The next morning, I woke up determined to search Melissa's room. I knew it was wrong, but the coincidence was too strong to ignore. How many pearl bracelets with sapphire clasps could there be? I waited until both my mother and Melissa left for their shopping trip to Boston. The house felt eerily quiet as I climbed the stairs to the guest room. My hands shook as I turned the doorknob. The room was immaculate, as always when Melissa visited. Her clothes were hung perfectly in the closet, her toiletries arranged with military precision on the dresser. But it was the jewelry box on the nightstand that made my heart race. It was larger than mine, made of dark mahogany with intricate carvings. As I lifted the lid, soft music began to play, some classical piece I didn't recognize. The compartments were lined with cream-colored silk, and they were full. In the first compartment, nestled between a pair of diamond earrings I'd never seen before, was my grandmother's pearl bracelet. The sapphire clasp caught the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the window, just as I remembered. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. There was no mistake. This was definitely my bracelet. I could see the tiny scratch on the back of the clasp where I'd accidentally dropped it when I was 12. But that wasn't all. In the second compartment lay my grandmother's silver locket. I opened it with shaking fingers, and there was my grandfather's faded photograph, just as it had always been. The third compartment held the gold chain with the emerald pendant. And there, pinned to a small velvet cushion, was the butterfly brooch that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Every single piece that had gone missing from my room was here, displayed in Melissa's jewelry box as if they'd always belonged to her. I heard the front door slam and my mother's voice calling out, "We're back! Sarah, come see what we bought!" Quickly, I closed the jewelry box and slipped out of the room, my mind reeling. How had Melissa gotten my jewelry? There was only one explanation, and it made me sick to think about it. My own mother had been stealing from me and giving my inheritance to my cousin. As I walked downstairs, I could hear them laughing in the kitchen, bags rustling as they unpacked their purchases. I stood in the doorway, watching my mother fawn over Melissa's new dress, and felt something inside me break. "Find anything interesting while we were gone?" my mother asked, not looking up from the shopping bags. The question felt loaded, like she somehow knew what I'd discovered. But her expression remained neutral, almost innocent. "No," I said quietly. "Nothing at all." But as I watched Melissa model her new clothes, I noticed she was wearing my grandmother's gold chain with the emerald pendant. It looked beautiful against her cream-colored sweater, and she wore it with the kind of confidence that came from believing it truly belonged to her. That night, I called my grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Davidson, who had handled all of her affairs. His secretary said he could see me the following week, but something in my voice must have conveyed my urgency, because he agreed to meet me the next morning. "I need to ask you about my grandmother's will," I told him as I sat in his wood-paneled office, surrounded by law books and the smell of old leather. Mr. Davidson was in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd known my family for decades and had been my grandmother's trusted advisor. "Of course, Sarah. What would you like to know?" "The jewelry. She always told me it would all be mine someday, but some pieces have gone missing, and I'm starting to wonder if—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "How do you tell someone that you suspect your own mother of theft?" Mr. Davidson leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Your grandmother was very specific about her jewelry collection in the will. Every piece is accounted for and documented with photographs. She wanted to make sure there would be no confusion about her wishes. Photographs? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Oh yes, she spent an entire afternoon here about 2 years ago, laying out every piece of jewelry she owned on my conference table while my assistant photographed them. She was quite thorough. Said she wanted to make sure each item went to the right person. My heart began to race. Could I see those photographs? Certainly. He pulled out a thick file folder and opened it on his desk. She left very detailed instructions about the distribution of her jewelry. As he turned the pages, I saw photograph after photograph of my grandmother's jewelry collection. Every piece I remembered, and many I'd forgotten, laid out with small cards indicating who should receive what. And according to the will, every single piece was supposed to come to me. Mr. Davidson continued flipping through the photographs, and with each page, my anger grew. There was documentation for over 40 pieces of jewelry, from simple silver rings to elaborate diamond sets. Every single item had a small white card next to it with my name written in my grandmother's careful handwriting. She was adamant that, "You receive her entire jewelry collection," Mr. Davidson said, his voice gentle but firm. She mentioned several times that you were the only one who truly appreciated the stories behind each piece. I stared at a photograph of the butterfly brooch, the one currently sitting in Melissa's jewelry box upstairs. The card next to it read, "For Sarah. This belonged to my mother, Margaret, who wore it on her wedding day in 1923. Mr. Davidson, what happens if someone takes jewelry before the will is executed?" His expression grew serious. That would constitute theft of estate property. The items legally belong to the beneficiary as soon as the will is probated, which in this case was 6 months ago. He leaned forward. "Sarah, is there something specific you need to tell me?" I spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything: the missing pieces, finding them in Melissa's room, my mother's strange behavior. Mr. Davidson listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "This is quite serious," he said when I finished. "Your grandmother's estate was worth considerably more than your family may realize. The jewelry collection alone was appraised at over $200,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $200,000. I'd known the pieces were valuable, but I'd never imagined. What should I do? First, I need to make some calls. Then, I think it's time we had a formal meeting with your mother and your cousin. Can you arrange for them to be here tomorrow at 2 o'clock? I nodded, though my stomach was churning. How was I going to explain this to my mother? How do you accuse someone you love of stealing from you? The drive home felt endless. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I'd rehearsed the conversation 12 times, but nothing seemed right. I found my mother and Melissa in the living room, looking through photo albums from Melissa's college years. "There you are," my mother said brightly. "We were wondering where you'd disappeared to. Look at these pictures of Melissa's graduation. Doesn't she look stunning in her cap and gown?" "Beautiful," I managed, though my voice sounded hollow even, to my own ears. Melissa was wearing the emerald necklace again, and seeing it made my chest tight with rage. But I forced myself to smile and sit down on the edge of the couch. "Actually, I need to talk to both of you about something important. Mr. Davidson wants to meet with us tomorrow at his office, 2 o'clock. My mother's face went pale. "Mr. Davidson? Why?" "There are some issues with Grandma Rose's will that need to be clarified." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Melissa looked up from the photo album, her green eyes suddenly alert and wary. "What kind of issues?" she asked. "I'd rather discuss it at his office, with him present." I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. "I'm going to make some tea. Does anyone want some?" Neither of them answered. As I walked toward the kitchen, I could hear them whispering urgently behind me, but I couldn't make out the words. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandmother's face and remembered all the times she'd told me stories about her jewelry. How her own mother had saved for months to buy that butterfly brooch. How my grandfather had surprised her with the pearl bracelet for their 5th anniversary. How each piece carried the weight of family history and love, and my mother had just given them away. The next morning, both my mother and Melissa were unusually quiet at breakfast. Melissa kept touching the emerald necklace like it was a talisman, while my mother pushed scrambled eggs around her plate without eating. "Maybe I should head back to New York today," Melissa said suddenly. "I just remembered I have an important meeting on Thursday." "No." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "You need to be at this meeting, Melissa. It concerns you directly." Her eyes flashed with something that might have been fear, but she nodded reluctantly. The law office felt different this time, charged with tension that hadn't been there during my private meeting with Mr. Davidson. He had arranged chairs around the conference table, and the photographs of my grandmother's jewelry were spread out in neat rows. My mother gasped when she saw them. "Oh my God, Rose. What were you thinking?" "Good afternoon, Patricia, Melissa," Mr. Davidson said formally as we took our seats. "Thank you for coming. I've asked Sarah to arrange this meeting because there appears to be some confusion about Rose Mitchell's final wishes regarding her jewelry collection." He gestured to the photographs. "As you can see, Rose was very thorough in documenting every piece and specifying exactly who should receive what. The entire collection was left to Sarah." Melissa's hand flew to the emerald necklace at her throat. "That's impossible. These pieces have been in the family for years. My mother always said—" "What exactly did your mother say?" Mr. Davidson interrupted gently but firmly. Melissa glanced at my mother, who was staring at the photographs with a stricken expression. She said that Grandma Rose had always intended for the jewelry to be shared among the granddaughters, that Sarah was getting the house, so it was only fair that I get some of the jewelry. I'm afraid that's not accurate. Mr. Davidson pulled out the official will and opened it to a marked page. Rose's instructions were crystal clear. She left the house jointly to her daughter Patricia and her granddaughter Sarah. The jewelry collection in its entirety goes to Sarah. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Rose always said family should share. She wouldn't have wanted one person to get everything. Actually, Mrs. Henderson, your mother was very specific about her reasoning." Mr. Davidson flipped to another section of the will. "She wrote a letter to be read in case there were any disputes. Would you like me to read it?" Before anyone could answer, he began. "To my beloved family, if you are hearing this letter, it means there has been some confusion about my jewelry collection. I want to be absolutely clear. Every piece goes to my granddaughter Sarah. She is the only one who ever listened to the stories behind each piece, who understood that jewelry isn't just about material value but about the love and memories embedded in each item. Sarah knows that the butterfly brooch belonged to her great-grandmother Margaret, that the pearl bracelet was a gift from her grandfather for our anniversary, that the emerald necklace was purchased with money I saved from my first job as a secretary. These aren't just accessories, they are our family history, and I trust only Sarah to preserve and honor that history." The silence in the room was deafening. Melissa's face had gone white, and she was slowly reaching up to unclasp the emerald necklace with shaking hands. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Aunt Patricia said—" "What exactly did Aunt Patricia say?" Mr. Davidson asked, his tone professional but with an underlying steel that made it clear this was not a casual question. My mother's composure finally cracked. Tears began streaming down her face as she looked between me and Melissa. I thought Sarah was being selfish, keeping everything for herself. Melissa had so much debt from school, and she was working so hard to build her career. Those pieces would help her get established, Maybe give her confidence. So you took them from Sarah's room and gave them to Melissa, Mr. Davidson stated. I didn't steal them, my mother protested. They're family pieces. I'm Rose's daughter. I should have some say in how they're distributed. Actually, you shouldn't. Mr. Davidson's voice was calm but firm. The moment your mother passed away, those items became Sarah's legal property. Taking them without her permission, regardless of your intentions, constitutes theft. The word hung in the air like a sword. Melissa slowly placed the emerald necklace on the conference table, her hands trembling. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I had no idea. Your mother told me that Grandma Rose had wanted me to have these pieces, that you had agreed to it. She said you thought I needed them more than you did. I looked at my mother, this woman who had raised me, who had held me when I cried, who had celebrated every small victory in my life, and I saw a stranger. How could you lie to her like that? How could you lie to me? My mother's sobs were the only sound in the room for several long moments. When she finally spoke, her voice was broken. Because you never needed anything that way Melissa did. You were always so self-sufficient, so content with what you had. But Melissa, she's always struggled, always been hungry for more. I thought if she had some beautiful things, it might help her feel more secure. Those weren't your things to give away, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. They were mine. Grandma Rose chose to give them to me. Not to Melissa, not to you. Me. Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. The question now is how we move forward. Sarah, you have every right to press charges for theft. The value of the items taken exceeds $5,000, which would make this a felony in Massachusetts. The room went completely silent. My mother's face went ashen, and Melissa looked like she might be sick. The word felony seemed to echo in the mahogany-paneled office. My mother's breathing became rapid and shallow, and for a moment I thought she might faint. Sarah, please, she whispered. I'm your mother. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you after your father left. You can't seriously be considering— Stop. I held up my hand, surprised by the authority in my own voice. Don't you dare make this about Dad leaving us. This is about you stealing from me and lying about it for months. Melissa had been quietly removing jewelry piece by piece, a pair of earrings I hadn't even recognized, a silver bracelet, a small ruby ring. She placed each item carefully on the conference table like she was dismantling a bomb. There's more, she said quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes. In my apartment in New York, your mother gave me several pieces when I graduated from Princeton. She said they were early graduation gifts from Grandma Rose. My heart sank. What pieces? A diamond tennis bracelet, some vintage brooches, a necklace with what looked like family sapphires. Her voice grew smaller with each item. I wore the tennis bracelet to job interviews. I thought it made me look more established. Mr. Davidson was taking notes, his pen scratching against the legal pad with mechanical precision. We'll need a complete inventory of everything in your possession, Miss Chen. Everything will need to be returned immediately. Of course, Melissa said quickly. I can drive back to the city tonight and— No. I surprised myself by interrupting. I'm coming with you. I want to see exactly what was taken. The drive to Manhattan was one of the longest 3 hours of my life. My mother had begged to come along, but I'd refused. I needed space from her, needed time to process the magnitude of her betrayal without her tears and justifications clouding my judgment. Melissa drove her sleek BMW in silence for the first hour, classical music playing softly from the stereo. Finally, she spoke. I never questioned it, you know. When your mother started giving me pieces, I just accepted her explanations. She made it sound like you had so much jewelry you couldn't possibly wear it all. I stared out at the Connecticut countryside rolling past. I didn't have that much. Most of it was packed away in boxes because I was afraid to wear the really valuable pieces to work or school. She told me you'd said I should have the diamond bracelet because I had more formal events to attend, that you thought it would be wasted on you. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Not only had my mother stolen from me, but she'd made me complicit in the theft by fabricating conversations that had never happened. Did you ever think it was strange that she never mentioned these gifts in front of me? Melissa's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I asked her about that once. She said you were going through a selfish phase and might be upset about sharing. She said it was better to keep it between us until you matured. I let out a bitter laugh. A selfish phase. Right. Sarah, I am so sorry. If I had known, you would have what? Given them back? Or would you have found a way to justify keeping them? The question hung between us, and Melissa didn't answer. Her apartment in Soho was everything I'd expected. Exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. But what struck me most was how the jewelry was displayed. She had a custom-built glass case in her bedroom, lit with professional museum lighting. Inside, arranged on black velvet, were pieces I recognized and pieces I'd never seen before. The diamond tennis bracelet caught the light like captured starlight. A brooch shaped like a peacock that I vaguely remembered from my grandmother's collection sat next to earrings that sparkled with what looked like real emeralds. Jesus, Melissa. This looks like a jewelry store display. She stood behind me, rapping, her arms around herself. I've always loved beautiful things. When your mother started giving me pieces, I had them professionally appraised and insured. I researched the history of each piece, learned about the time periods and craftsmanship techniques. You researched them? The peacock brooch is art. Nouveau, probably from around 1905. The sapphire necklace is definitely Victorian, maybe 1880s. The diamond bracelet is more modern, 1950s, I think. I turned to look at her. You know more about these pieces than I do. Your grandmother was an incredible collector. She had pieces from at least 6 different decades, all authentic, all museum quality. I started reading books about antique jewelry, learning to identify different settings and stone cuts. Her voice grew wistful. I felt connected to the family history in a way I'd never experienced before. The irony was staggering. My mother had given away my inheritance to someone who had come to appreciate it more than I ever had. While I'd kept most of the jewelry locked away, afraid to damage it, Melissa had studied it, cherished it, displayed it like the art it truly was. But that didn't make what happened right. We spent 2 hours carefully removing every piece from the display case. Melissa had detailed records, photographs, appraisal documents, insurance papers. She'd documented everything with the kind of meticulous care that spoke to genuine love and respect for the collection. There's something else, she said as we packed the last brooch into a padded jewelry case. Your mother didn't just give me jewelry. She also gave me some of your grandmother's personal papers. Letters mostly, and some old photographs. She led me to a wooden secretary desk by the window. Inside the top drawer was a manila folder filled with documents I'd never seen before. Love letters from my grandfather to my grandmother, written during World War II when he was stationed in the Pacific. Photographs of my great-grandparents' wedding, with my great-grandmother wearing the butterfly brooch that I'd found in Melissa's room just days ago. A deed to property in Vermont that I didn't know existed. And at the bottom of the folder, a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my grandmother's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. My dearest Sarah, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means you've discovered that some of my jewelry was not where I left it for you. I suspected this might happen, which is why I took certain precautions. The key enclosed opens a safety deposit box at Westfield Savings Bank, box number 247. Inside, you will find the pieces I treasured most, the ones I knew would be safest away from prying eyes. Your mother has always been generous with other people's belongings. and I feared she might not understand the distinction between sharing and stealing. The box also contains documents about additional property that belongs to you now. I love you, sweetheart. Take care of our treasures, Grandma Rose. I read the letter twice before the words fully sank in. My grandmother knew. She'd known my mother would steal from me, and she'd hidden the most valuable pieces away. What does it say? Melissa asked quietly. I handed her the letter and watched, her face change as she read it. When she finished, she looked up at me with something that might have been a relief. She knew your mother would do this. Apparently, she knew her daughter better than I did. We drove back to Massachusetts in silence, the jewelry cases secured in Melissa's trunk like precious cargo. But my mind wasn't on what we'd recovered. It was on what might be waiting in that safety deposit box, and on the growing realization that my grandmother had been orchestrating this revelation from beyond the grave. When we arrived back in Westfield, my mother was waiting in the kitchen, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up hopefully when we walked in, but her expression fell when she saw the serious look on my face. Did you get everything? We got what was in Melissa's apartment, I said carefully. But it turns out there's more to this story than any of us knew. I placed my grandmother's letter on the kitchen table and watched my mother's face go pale as she recognized the handwriting. She knew, Mom. Grandma Rose knew exactly what you would do, and she planned for it. My mother picked up the letter with trembling hands and read it slowly. When she finished, she set it down and covered her face with her hands. The safety deposit box, she whispered. I wondered why she suddenly needed one. She said it was for important documents. What else aren't you telling me? But before my mother could answer, my phone rang. It was Mr. Davidson. Sarah, I need you to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. I've been reviewing your grandmother's complete file, and there are some additional matters we need to discuss. Significant matters. After I hung up, the three of us sat around the kitchen table in silence, surrounded by the weight of secrets and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring even more revelations. Whatever was in that safety deposit box, whatever additional documents Mr. Davidson had found, I had the sinking feeling that the jewelry theft was just the beginning of a much larger story. I arrived at the bank 40 minutes before it opened, clutching the brass key and my grandmother's letter like a lifeline. Mr. Davidson had agreed to meet me there at 9 o'clock sharp, but I couldn't sit still at home for another minute. My mother had spent the night crying in her room, and Melissa had taken the earliest train back to New York, leaving behind an atmosphere so thick with tension I could barely breathe. The security guard unlocked the doors at exactly 9, and Mr. Davidson appeared moments later, carrying his weathered briefcase and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. Good morning, Sarah. Are you ready for this? I don't know, I admitted. I feel like I don't know anything anymore. The safety deposit box room was smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh relief. The bank employee, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, used both my key and the bank's master key to open box 247. Inside was a large metal container that required both hands to lift out. Mr. Davidson gestured to a private viewing room, where I set the box on a small table, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The first thing I saw when I opened the lid was another letter from my grandmother, this one much thicker than the first. Beneath it were velvet pouches of various sizes and a manila envelope marked, Urgent, for Sarah's eyes only. I picked up the letter and began to read. My darling Sarah, if you are reading this, then my suspicions about your mother have proven correct, and you've discovered the theft I knew would happen. I'm sorry you had to go through this pain, but I needed you to see Patricia's true character before I could tell you the rest of the truth. The jewelry your mother stole from you represents only a fraction of what is rightfully yours. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about our family. I stopped reading and looked at Mr. Davidson. Did you know about this? Some of it. Your grandmother was very secretive about certain aspects of her estate planning. She said there were family matters that needed to be revealed in a specific order. I continued reading. Sarah, your mother is not actually my biological daughter. Patricia was the child of my late husband's first wife, who died when Patricia was only 3 years old. When I married your grandfather in 1952, I adopted Patricia and raised her as my own. She never knew the truth. We thought it was better that way. But Patricia's biological mother, Eleanor Whitman, came from one of the wealthiest families in New England. When Eleanor died, she left a substantial trust fund for her daughter to be managed by the Whitman family lawyers until Patricia turned 35. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. The implications of what I was reading were staggering. Patricia never claimed this inheritance because she never knew it existed. The Whitman family lawyers tried to contact her several times over the years, but your grandfather and I intercepted the letters. We were afraid that sudden wealth would change her, make her lose the values we'd worked so hard to instill. By the time she turned 35, the attempts to contact her had stopped, and we assumed the matter was closed. We were wrong. I looked up at Mr. Davidson, who was watching me carefully. How much money are we talking about? Keep reading, he said gently. Last month, I received a call from the Whitman family estate attorneys. Eleanor's trust fund, along with 30 years of compound interest and investment growth, now totals over $4 million. The money legally belongs to Patricia, but here's the crucial detail. If Patricia dies without claiming it, the entire inheritance goes to her next of kin. Since you are Patricia's only child, that would be you. The room began to spin. $4 million. I set the letter down and took several deep breaths before I could continue. I know what you're thinking. And no, I am not suggesting anything harmful should happen to your mother, but I am telling you this because Patricia's behavior toward you, her willingness to steal from her own daughter, tells me everything I need to know about the woman she's become. The jewelry theft that brought you here today proves that Patricia values material wealth over family loyalty. She doesn't deserve this inheritance, and more importantly, she cannot be trusted with it. I realized I was crying and wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Mr. Davidson handed me a tissue box. There's more, he said quietly. I picked up the letter again. In the manila envelope, you'll find documents that prove everything I've told you. Eleanor Whitman's death certificate, adoption papers, correspondence from the Whitman attorneys, and most importantly, a legal document I had prepared 6 months ago. I have transferred my own power of attorney over Patricia's inheritance to you. As her mother and legal guardian during the time she was supposed to claim the inheritance, I had the right to make decisions on her behalf. I've used that right to ensure that if anything happens to Patricia, or if she proves herself unworthy of this inheritance through her actions, the money will go directly to you. My mouth fell open. She can do that? Mr. Davidson nodded grimly. It's legally complex, but yes. Your grandmother was very thorough in her research. She consulted with 3 different estate attorneys to make sure everything was airtight. I turned back to the letter. Sarah, the choice is now yours. You can tell Patricia about her inheritance and watch her claim $4 million, money that she will likely waste or use to manipulate others the way she manipulated you with the jewelry. Or you can keep this information to yourself and wait. Patricia is 54 years old and in poor health due to her smoking and drinking. If she passes away without ever learning about the inheritance, it becomes yours automatically. I cannot tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. Patricia has shown you her true character. She stole from her own daughter without hesitation. She lied to family members and manipulated a young woman into believing she was entitled to things that weren't hers. This is not the behavior of someone who can be trusted with great wealth. I set the letter down, my head spinning. The moral implications were overwhelming. Did my mother deserve to know about her inheritance, even after what she'd done? Was it right to keep this information from her? Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. There's something else, Sarah. Your grandmother wasn't entirely accurate about your mother's health. What do you mean? I ran into Patricia's doctor at the country club last week. Dr. Morrison mentioned that your mother's recent tests have been concerning. Her liver enzymes are severely elevated, and her lung function is declining rapidly. He estimates she has perhaps 2 to 3 years left if she doesn't make significant lifestyle changes. The room felt like it was closing in around me. You're saying she's dying? I'm saying she's in declining health, and given her unwillingness to quit smoking or drinking, her prognosis is not good. I opened the manila envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were dozens of official documents, just as my grandmother had promised. Eleanor Whitman's death certificate from 1949, adoption papers dated 1952, letters from law firms with impressive letterheads, all attempting to contact Patricia Henderson about a significant inheritance. And at the bottom of the stack, a document that made my blood run cold. It was a medical report dated 6 months ago. My grandmother had hired a private investigator to look into my mother's health. The report detailed years of alcoholism, liver damage, and emphysema from chain smoking. The investigator had even obtained copies of medical records that painted a grim picture of my mother's future. My grandmother had known my mother was dying when she wrote these letters. Mr. Davidson, this feels wrong, like my grandmother was planning for my mother's death. I think your grandmother was being realistic about your mother's choices and their consequences, but the decision about what to do with this information is entirely yours. I looked at the velvet pouches I hadn't yet opened. What's in these? See for yourself. The first pouch contained a necklace that took my breath away. A strand of perfectly matched pearls with a diamond clasp that looked like it belonged in a museum. The second held a pair of emerald earrings that were easily the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. The third contained a ring with a diamond so large I was afraid to take it out of the pouch. These pieces alone are worth more than everything. Your mother gave to Melissa, Mr. Davidson said. Your grandmother saved the crown jewels of her collection for you to find this way. As I sat in that sterile bank room, surrounded by documents that could change my life forever, I realized my grandmother had orchestrated something far more complex than a simple inheritance. She had created a test, not just of my mother's character, but of mine. The jewelry theft had been the catalyst, but this was the real choice. Did I tell my dying mother about the $4 million she could claim? Or did I stay silent and inherit it myself after she was gone? Looking at those beautiful jewels, thinking about the money waiting in legal limbo, I understood that my grandmother had given me something more valuable than any inheritance. She had given me the power to choose what kind of person I wanted to be. I spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with my grandmother's revelation. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's tear-stained face from that awful day in the lawyer's office, heard her broken voice begging me not to press charges. But I also remembered months of lies, the casual way she'd given away my inheritance, and how she'd made Melissa believe I was selfish and ungrateful. On Thursday morning, I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring out at the garden where my grandmother used to grow her prize-winning roses. You look terrible, she said without turning around. You haven't been sleeping. Neither have you. She finally looked at me, and I was shocked by how much she'd aged in just a few days. Her skin was gray, her eyes sunken, and there was a tremor in her hands that I'd never noticed before. I've been thinking about what you said, about pressing charges. Her voice was hoarse, probably from the pack of cigarettes I'd heard her smoking on the back porch at 3 a.m. I deserve it. I know I do. I sat down across from her, my decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. Mom, we need to talk about a lot of things. Over the next hour, I told her everything. About the safety deposit box, about her true parentage, about Eleanor Whitman, and the $4 million waiting for her to claim. I watched her face cycle through disbelief, shock, anger, and finally, a sort of hollow understanding. "So Rose wasn't my real mother," she said when I finished. "All these years, I wondered why I never felt like I belonged. Why did I always felt like I was disappointing her somehow?" "She loved you," I said firmly. "She raised you as her own daughter. But she never trusted me enough to tell me the truth." My mother's laugh was bitter. "And apparently she was right not to trust me. Look what I did to you." "Mom, about the inheritance." "No." She held up her hand, stopping me. "I don't want it." I stared at her. "What?" "You heard me. I don't want Eleanor Whitman's money. $4 million from a woman I never knew, who gave birth to me and then died? What kind of person would I be if I took that money after what I did to you?" "But it's legally yours, Sarah." Her voice was steady for the first time in days. "I stole from my own daughter. I lied to my family. I gave away your grandmother's precious jewelry to someone else and told myself it was justified because she needed it more than you did." She took a shaky breath. "I've been an alcoholic for 15 years, and I've been hiding how sick I am because I was afraid of being alone when I die. The money won't change any of that." I felt tears starting and tried to blink them away. "Dr. Morrison told Mr. Davidson about your test results." She nodded. "I figured he might. Small town, you know. Everyone talks." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm dying, Sarah. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but soon. And I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to be the mother you deserved instead of the one you got." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm checking myself into rehab. Today. I've already called the place in Springfield that Dr. Morrison recommended." She squeezed my hand. "And it means that inheritance money goes to you, where it belongs. Someone in this family should benefit from Eleanor Whitman's legacy, and it sure as hell shouldn't be me." I was crying openly now. "Mom, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. Sarah, I've spent your entire life making decisions based on fear and jealousy and some twisted idea that the world owed me something because my life was hard. But my life wasn't harder than anyone else's. I just chose to make it harder by drinking and smoking and resenting everyone who seemed happier than me." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. "Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing when she set this all up. She gave me a choice. Be the mother I should have been, or watch my daughter inherit everything I threw away. She was testing both of us. And I choose you. I choose to be proud of the strong, honest woman you've become despite having me as a mother." She turned back to me, and for the first time in years, her smile looked genuine. "I'm signing papers today to formally renounce any claim to Eleanor Whitman's estate. The money is yours." 6 months later, I stood in the same garden, now overgrown with new roses I'd planted using my grandmother's old gardening journals. My mother had been in rehab for 3 months and was doing better than anyone had expected. She'd stopped smoking, was attending AA meetings religiously, and had gained back some of the weight she'd lost. Melissa visited every few weeks, often bringing flowers or books about antique jewelry. She'd started working with a therapist to understand why she'd always felt the need to acquire things to feel worthy, and we'd begun building something that felt like an actual friendship. The inheritance money was safely invested, earning interest, while I decided what to do with it. I'd already set aside funds for my mother's medical care and had quietly paid off Melissa's student loans, something I'd asked her not to tell my mother about. But the real treasure was the jewelry collection, now properly displayed in a custom case in my bedroom. I'd learned to appreciate each piece the way my grandmother had intended, understanding the history and craftsmanship that made each item special. The butterfly brooch sat in a place of honor, and every time I looked at it, I remembered my great-grandmother, Margaret, wearing it on her wedding day in 1923. The pearl bracelet reminded me of my grandparents' love story. The emerald necklace spoke of my grandmother's first job and the independence it represented. These weren't just valuable objects, they were family stories made tangible. My mother came to visit on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, looking healthier than she had in years. She admired the jewelry display and listened as I told her the stories behind each piece, stories my grandmother had shared with me during long summer afternoons in this same garden. She really did love these pieces, my mother said softly, touching the glass case gently. I remember her polishing them when I was little, telling me about the people who wore them before her. She wanted to tell you those stories too, I said. But you were always too busy or too distracted or too drunk, she finished quietly. I know. I missed a lot of things, Sarah. I'm trying not to miss any more. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the roses bloom in the afternoon sun. Finally, my mother spoke again. I got a letter from the Whitman family lawyers yesterday. They wanted to confirm that I was formally renouncing the inheritance. And I signed the papers. It's official now. The money is yours. She looked at me with eyes that were clearer than they'd been in years. I also did something else. I wrote you a letter, like your grandmother did. Something for you to read someday when I'm gone. She pulled an envelope from her purse and handed it to me. My name was written on it in her careful handwriting. You don't have to read it now, she said. But when you do, you'll understand that losing those jewelry pieces was the best thing that ever happened to our family. It forced us to confront who we really were, and it gave us a chance to choose who we wanted to become. I held the letter carefully, thinking about my grandmother's elaborate plan and how it had ultimately brought our family back together in the most unexpected way. Do you think she knew? I asked. Grandma Rose, do you think she knew it would end this way? My mother smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. Your grandmother was the smartest woman I ever knew. She understood people better than they understood themselves. So yes, I think she knew exactly how this would end. As I watched my mother tend to the roses with gentle hands, I realized that my grandmother's greatest gift hadn't been the jewelry or the money. It had been the chance for redemption, for both of us to choose love over resentment, forgiveness over revenge, and family over pride. The jewelry that had started this whole ordeal now sat safely in my room, but its real value wasn't in the gold and gems. It was in the lessons learned, the relationships rebuilt, and the understanding that sometimes the most precious inheritances are the ones that teach us who we really want to be. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.